Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to Thriving Together, Considering Place as transformative opportunity for university engagement. My name is Lisa Brown, and I'm Vice President of Advancement and External Relations at Memorial University, and I am based in St. John's in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. And wherever you are, I hope the sun is shining like it is right here for this moment, or at least that you have some light in your life. Before we go any further, of course, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement, and particularly important given that we're talking about place. And so I acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated have many diverse Indigenous groups, and I acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit. And I hope you also take the opportunity to acknowledge the Indigenous territories and peoples in which you are placed. So we're streaming from the Emera Innovation Center at Memorial's Signal Hill campus in St. John's. And our moderator and our presenters are coming through to you in various remote locations, and we're glad that we're all here together. You can see the lovely view that you can actually get from the Emera Center of the Narrows in St. John's. This webinar is a co-presentation between Memorial University and Engagement Academy for University Leaders. And you can learn more about both of us by taking a look at the links that will be in the chat. And so we'll be using the chat quite a bit today. We won't have time in this hour presentation to have live Q&A, but we encourage you to write your comments and your questions in the chat. And we also would love for you to introduce yourself and let us know where you are in the chat as well. And as you know the drill, please do mute your microphone. And just to advise you that we are recording this session as well. Our communications lead, Rebecca, will be monitoring the chat for questions, and please do write them in. So we're really excited to be talking about place, and place is so important for many people, but particularly at Memorial University, and you're going to hear more about that a little bit later on. But we are the province's only university. We were created as a living monument to those who died in World War I and World War II. And our founding legislation notes that we have a special obligation to the people of this province. So place is clearly very important to everybody here at this university. And we're really looking forward to discussing with you what that means, how we share it with various stakeholders, and how we can move the concept of place and public engagement further. So I'm really pleased to pass the notes now along to Dr. Laura-Lee Sandman, who is Professor Emerita in Lifelong Education, Administration and Policy, the College of Education at the University of Georgia. And Laura-Lee, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for the welcome and for situating what we are doing today. I'm delighted to be joining you and our other key colleagues and all of you as fellow leaders as we explore thriving together, considering place as the transformative opportunity for university engagement. As Lisa mentioned, I'm from a little further south than most of you, and I'm very pleased to be part of this team for this session and also being able to return to beautiful St. John's for the upcoming Engagement Academy for University Leaders in July. For 14 years, the EA, the Engagement Academy, has been training over 1,000 higher education leaders representing 160 institutions on 4 continents. And while Canadians have attended past academies, we are very excited to be collaborating with Memorial University to hold a customized offering in Canada. The EA premier professional development program and action planning experience designed to help higher education professionals develop collaborative relations with external partners as a way to help institutions and the communities thrive. So why are we focusing on thriving together, and why now? For the next few minutes, we will explore with you as leaders of regional universities how public engagement as a competitive strategy can promote the health and vitality of regional universities, colleges, and the communities they serve. We will present a framework to consider, discuss it within Memorial University context as an example, respond to questions, and then offer the next step. Before we proceed, let's clarify what we mean by community or public engagement. We'll begin with our conceptualization of engagement. That is how the EA and others think about this work. As this graphic shows, our view of engaged institutions is that the public is embedded within the three-legged stool. It doesn't stand alone as a priority or as an add-on priority, but engagement can be expressed by, embedded in, and can in fact transform our practices of research, teaching, and service. That is, it can live as a type of scholarship, scholarly research, teaching, and learning, as well as at the intersection of such. So let me just review that service is not the same as scholarly engagement. That's not to negate the value of service, and some might do service that is engaged, but lots of services are not engaged. The defining characteristic is mutuality and mutual benefit. Engagement requires us to think beyond the traditional mode of outreach or one-way dissemination model toward a two-way model, a co-construction for mutual benefit. This trajectory can be expressed in the next slide, please, to move from to, for, and even in the public or community to with the public and community. The movement to into with requires partnerships. It's a way to think through reciprocity and mutual benefit. For some of our partnerships, it can be guided by such a definition as Memorial University, where public engagement is defined by, and I quote, collaborations between people and groups within Memorial and people and groups external to the university, that is the publics, which further Memorial's mission. Drawing on the knowledge and resources brought by all involved, public engagement involves mutual respect, mutual contributions, and mutual benefits for all participants, close quote. This definition highlights that the mutual benefits and contributions advance through public engagement and can be depicted by teaching, research, and service with this engagement ethos. Given that overview, we recognize that this notion of mutual benefit typically occurs on a continuum. I really like this notion of continuum and introduces, however, some dilemmas and tensions that your institution and you as university leaders are probably dealing with. And these warrant much more discussion than we'll be able to provide today, but let me address these generally, which are a little bit depicted in the next slide. The benefit of engagement are not always even among university and external stakeholders. Powerful entities from either the university side or the external stakeholder side may lead the agenda at the expense of the other. There are histories of university exploitation, histories of indigenous communities, for example, or partner exploitation, such as with large industries or sectors that may be exploiting universities. So that's one challenge. Another challenge in trying to achieve these mutual benefits is the benefits to the public may be contested in our particular polarized society. Whose vision of the public good are we pursuing? What social movements might our engagement efforts be attached to? Who are the advocates for and foes for these movements? What is our role in adjudicating competing visions for this common good? And also, as university engagement professionals, we often tend to shy away from the university side of the ledger, the university benefits side of this ledger. The result is public engagement can be seen or positioned as a cost center rather than a strategic partner for the next generation. Consequently, public engagement is vulnerable in leadership transitions and cost-cutting measures. Given these challenges, we will tilt this conversation this afternoon toward exploring the university benefit part of that partnership or ledger for this topic. And we're going to do so through a particular model or framework. So drawing from this understanding of public engagement and presenting this framework or model is Dr. David Woods, a longtime collaborator of mine at the University of Minnesota. He's a professor of higher education and director of the Engagement Academies for University Leaders. He will present an introduction to place and the engagement framework. David?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Laura Lee, and thank you all for joining us. I join you from Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA, just south of the border from our Canadian friends. And I just wanted to start out by providing some brief context about our approach to organizational change and leadership development and this notion of mutual benefit as we look at the Engagement Academy approach to some of this work. If you participated in an Engagement Academy event in the past, you'll recall that we draw extensively on the organizational science literature to anchor our understanding about engagement, practice, and leadership. And this requires a scholarly practitioner approach to really situating our discussion about how we lead these very complex organizations with partners with equally complex contexts. It's a really strong literature, this organizations literature that has broad applications to many types of organizations, including colleges and universities. With that as a backdrop and thinking about place and mutual benefit, I want to offer this notion of an ecological view of organizations and how this informs this notion about place. And here are some of the key tenets of what the ecological view is about and how it relates to mutual benefit. And this ecological view considers mutual benefit through the lens of interdependence and mutual reliance within an organization and its environment. And so this really sees the region, in this particular case, or community, as the ultimate source of order through knowledge, energy, and resources. And if you think about a natural system, for example, of animals, plants, and waterways in a particular ecosystem, you'll know that when one part of the ecosystem is in jeopardy, at risk, the entire system is at risk. So this is an important way to think about kind of notions of reciprocity and survival of the system. And then the same holds true then with universities and their environment in larger community and region, is that the regions need the university and the universities need the region. So the idea is building a healthy ecosystem from this particular view is really the central task of building and sustaining engaged universities. So with that, we'll go to the next slide with that as a kind of overall framework. And so if you think about this notion and a larger question that might be, what is the ecological landscape of higher education in a particular region? There's these two connecting pieces to that. And one you'll see on the left, place, and then on the right, institutional identity, where you're connecting knowledge, value, assets, and challenges across the two. And that this becomes the basis for the engagement agenda. Real quickly to say a word about that, the centrality of place invites us to ask key questions that I know our friends from Memorial are going to address in a little bit about how does our unique location influence the way you view ourselves, our work, and our various commitments. And this includes commitments and approaches to teaching, research, and broader public engagement and service in communities. And what unique knowledge and assets exist in this community, and how might these elements be engaged for mutual benefit? Thinking about that as well is what unique challenges exist in these communities, and how could they be solved in a way bringing together these parties for mutual benefit to create this flourishing system. And the other piece of it is the institutional identity side of it. This actually draws from some interesting literature related within this subgroup, which is called just organizational identity. And the core questions that animate these kind of ways of thinking are, who are we as an institution? How should we act? How do others see us? How do others think that we should act? And this is normative in nature in the sense that some of this is deep and long understandings about our particular institution through our founders and the general notion of what we were founded to be. I think Penny will put up in the chat just a quick reference to a kind of a classic piece, older piece from many years ago by sociologist Burton Clark, who talked about this notion of organizational saga in higher education. And what saga refers to is this distinctiveness that derives from our college's passion, university passion, personality, leadership, and original programs. And he talks about the notion that this builds an institutional narrative or saga that guides our understanding of our, in this case, our engagement work. So a particular example about this on how an institution might build meaning around their own saga is my home state across the border here, across the St. Croix River, and that is in Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin. Some of the main, you can go back left to that. Not quite ready for that slide. That's okay. And that is the main saga around that is a notion called the Wisconsin idea. And this is a late 19th century vision for Wisconsin higher education that really promoted democratic engagement, self-governance, and co-constructing knowledge for the good of people in Wisconsin. It's very unique in its Midwestern focus around kind of the rural communities there and the focus on agriculture and other areas. It continues to have a very strong imprint on how the institution tells its story and its narrative around its historical interest in this particular area. Before I leave this slide, I do acknowledge, especially thinking about Lisa's opening with the land acknowledgement, that these institutional sagas are complex and not always positive, and that there's certainly a mixed legacy that's related to colonialism, injustices, related to the founding of our institutions. The Wisconsin idea is not immune from this, and I end with this with just saying that this mixed legacy is really also the foundation of an engagement agenda as we seek to build trust and renew trust in these institutions and rethink our work for the future. So the next slide, please. There you go. This next slide, I want to say, relates to this notion of connecting place to resources and advocacy. The organizational ecology literature focuses a lot on resources, and that is how organizations within resource-scarce environments survive, and the importance of interdependence. In the higher ed space, we often ask how engagement can be employed as a strategy to attract and sustain support for an institution that supports the overall ecosystem of the institution. So how might this be leveraged in advocacy for public dollars, but also for private dollars as well? Here's a piece that I particularly like. It's a great story from years ago that I think fits like a glove with this notion. And this will be in the chat as well, from an article from Langseth and McVitie, who talked about how they thought about engagement as a core leadership practice and how it informed their resource development. So the story around this in Portland, Oregon, USA, is that in 1946, the area was concerned and interested to serve World War II veterans in the particular area, where they developed an extension center to serve this particular need. But this was a daunting task in the notion that neighboring Oregon State and University of Oregon, very well established, well-resourced institutions were in this particular area. But this group came together, undaunted by this, and community partners, along with educational leaders, including the Port of Portland, Pacific Power and Light, Portland Chamber of Commerce, came together and created university status for Portland State University in 1969. So they began to gain and had long kind of identity around these Portland roots. And by 1990, it was poised to become one of the signature, more evidentiary places of doing public engagement well in the US, particularly in credit to President Judith Ramaley, who was led this effort from 1990 to 1997. And what you see here is a picture, I think it's a beautiful symbolic picture of what we're talking about, where you see it says, "Let knowledge serve the city." And if you go to Portland, you see what the one side of the connection is the campus, the other side is the city, and the road passed between. But I think what this symbolically, the symbolism here is around that this is two-way, right? So there's knowledge in the city that serves the city and the university, and they come together. So I think this is a really nice piece to look at. Soon after, not far after the kind of development of this work, a public fundraising campaign was announced in 2004 with a goal for $100 million goal to raise for Portland State University, the largest in its history, and really the first of its history to have a campaign. They were successful with $114 million goal, surpassing the goal by $14 million. President Daniel Bernstein was there at the time. And an interesting story around this is when we think about many of our own institutions, often we rely on our own alumni who are friends of the university, who understand the work to fund this work. But a fascinating story about this is the majority of the funds that came for this campaign was from the community members themselves. And here's this great quote that from a family who gave over $1 million to the institution that says, "We didn't attend Portland State University, but we're enrolled in this vision." And I think this is a really colorful illustration around this notion that in many cases our resource providers are drawn to building this vibrant community or ecosystem, and that the goal is not in itself of building an institution. And so finally, within the slide, I share there's another piece that I just wanted to make mention of, and we'll put this in the chat as well. There's also some of literature in the work around state appropriations for higher education, a little work that I've done on this of longitudinal studies that really investigate how engaged institutions in the US position themselves for legislative support among competitors. And I won't go into kind of the long piece about this, but from the article in the chat, we'll talk through this. But basically, it's the notion that engaged institutions, there's evidence of providing competitive strategy related to this engagement mission, leveraging their location, thinking about their unique governance arrangement in case that makes their distinctiveness around engagement favorable to earn state support. I'm going to leave that here with the rest to be talked about in beautiful Newfoundland in July. So we will move on to the next slide. The final piece of it before I turn this back is this notion of university and institutional vitality. These ask questions around how does this engagement agenda help us potentially in times of crisis, but also more broadly to create a competitive and healthy region. And also examples of how this might sustain and differentiate institutions from others in strengthening their own kind of position and who they are as an institution and their, what I might call the public good story that they serve in their particular locations and regions. So for those of you who live in the southern United States, this might be a familiar and scary sight from August 2005. And that is when Hurricane Katrina displaced thousands of students at Tulane University, a selective private institution in New Orleans, Louisiana in the US. Not long after the major fallout from this, senior administrators announced $60 million in budget cuts to the university due to the devastation. There was anxiety that the possibility was to actually close the institution. But yet in this crisis, what emerged from this was what's called the Partnership for the Transformation of Urban Communities with the city of New Orleans. And the campus, Tulane, really moved engagement from the periphery to really the core of its identity. And during this time, really prioritized civic learning and created what was called the Center for Engaged Learning and Teaching. And some of the key messaging about this kind of revamped institution was saying, we are partnering with the city of New Orleans to rebuild our community. Come and join us. And I think the fascinating part about this is to hear some of the results of this that reached very broadly around the US. One of the key pieces is that applications for enrollment soared from across the country. In fact, one of the stories that emerged from this was they actually had in their first week so many applications that it actually overloaded their system. Kind of a fascinating side story. As did charitable contributions really flow to the campus for this really important vision of the work to be done together. And the leaders at the time, we were talking about a profound and permanent change to the culture of the university. And this ecological perspective really looks at this notion of this symbiotic relationship, in this case, to revive a historic city and sustain an institution. I think one of the things we'll say and we will touch about in the summer is all of these institutions, due to leadership changes, certainly have ups and downs and flows of this, and there's transition around this. That's part of the story, and again, a part of the larger academy we'll talk about. And now I'm just going to turn to the kind of the last slide here before I turn it over to our friends at Memorial. And I will just end by saying the ecological perspective is instructive to think about this notion of thriving together, considering place as this transformative opportunity for university engagement. And so I've shared some examples from the US that are prominent. There's certainly others, and those many of you to tell on your own as well. So these are important things to think about. The last thing you can put up in the chat is some of these perspectives and stories and frameworks, including rubrics around thinking about this, is available in the chat. This is through special issue of the Journal of Higher Ed Outreach Engagement around resource development and this notion of leading from the middle, of how we link this work to a larger university agenda around sustainability and resource development. So with this, I'm pleased to turn it back to Laura Lee to facilitate our discussion with our Memorial friends on how this framing might be uniquely applied to the Canadian context and specifically at Memorial. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for really drawing from this interdisciplinary research and providing an understanding and a framework of connecting place to institutional identity and using it as a strategy and providing us some examples. Now we're going to go from even more theory to practice, more examples. And before we do that, let me remind you participants, if you have questions about what David's been talking about or your own experiences in this, would you please put them in the chat, and we'll get to them after the panel. We'd like to now consider how this framework that David kind of laid out, this type of thinking, can be applied in an institutional setting. So David and Lisa will actually be joined by Associate Vice President of Public Engagement and External Relations at Memorial, Dr. Rob Greenwood, to share the implications and applications of this framework through Memorial University. Over the years, I've been so impressed with Rob's deep commitment and his really indefatigable energy in championing and living the engagement framework at Memorial University. which actually coordinates and supports the university's collaborations with external and regional partners and stakeholders. So Rob, maybe you can start us out by talking about how has place affected the development of Memorial University's identity? And then also what benefits or challenges have arisen as a result of these commitments?
Get myself unmuted here, the Zoom thing. Great to be here with all our colleagues from across Canada and around the world, and really great to partner with the Engagement Academy. Lisa and I will tag team on this, and I'm sure David and you will jump in some more. As Lisa noted at the beginning, Memorial is the only university in Newfoundland and Labrador, and that in itself creates an opportunity and a connection to place that you just can't avoid. And we'll talk about some of the benefits and challenges of that. But as Lisa also noted, you know, in our mission is a notion of a special obligation to the people of the province. So, you know, we are a university like any other, with faculty who are experts in many areas and they're connected to global networks. But we always seem to bring it back to how can we contribute to the people, the communities, the organizations of the province. And often, for some pretty obvious reasons, the island of Newfoundland and our mainland section of Labrador, we're here in the North Atlantic, and we have a strong connection to the sea, our Indigenous peoples and the people who came from Europe, and over 500 years ago for the Europeans. And so, you know, there were people in Newfoundland when Columbus arrived here from Europe already. And so deep connection. And also with that ocean connection, we have across all our faculties and schools, students and faculty who specialize in areas that relate to the fishery and oil and gas and culture and heritage. I was in Australia once presenting on public engagement at Memorial, put up the map trying to show where Newfoundland was, and someone yelled out, "You don't need to tell us that. You have the best folklore department in the world." And so all of that is connected to place and identity. And so it really has been a strength, the island nature, the northern nature, connection of rural, very important for us also. And I would emphasize, before maybe Lisa wants to jump in on this, there's nothing parochial about that. We are very connected nationally and internationally with networks around expertise in these various areas. We're very active partners in the University of the Arctic. A colleague of mine already posted an upcoming session from the OECD that we're very active in. So I think we're able to leverage that commitment to place in a whole bunch of ways.
Yeah, and to build on that too, Rob, you know, I mentioned at the beginning that Memorial University, as the name would suggest, was created as a living monument to those people who had died in World War I and World War II. And that's particularly significant for this university because we were its own country until 1949. And so, you know, the fact that the university was created as a monument to those people who died fighting for our freedom means that we hold this place very dear, and that we have the governance of it, and how we run it is under scrutiny, and people are very interested in everything that we do. Our vision statement speaks to the fact that we want to create a healthy and sustainable province. So the university and the province are really interconnected in so many ways. I'm fairly new to the university setting, but previous to that, I worked at a community organization and certainly had lots of engagement with university folks in various faculties and schools for a number of years. And so it really is very much a part of the province, and the province is a part of it.
So Rob, going back to you, what benefits but also challenges have arisen as a result of Memorial's commitment?
Well, some of the benefits are that we're so connected, and there's a lot of work on innovation in small places, and the quadruple helix, and how the social capital in a place like this, you're able to connect very easily with people, with community organizations. Lisa, in her previous role, was a community partner who worked a lot with our organization and then seamlessly moves into the university and picks up from the other side. It's easy to pull together key players in a particular sector, whether it's social, economic, environmental. And we have some of the challenges that go with that then, though. And as Lisa mentioned a little bit, there are high expectations. And that's, in my view, a good thing. We receive public funds, we have students who pay tuition, and we do need to make that connection real and authentic. And, you know, when we approach faculty, I know I started at Memorial almost 18 years ago, starting what became the Leslie Harris Center of Regional Policy and Development, the Harris Center, really a brokering knowledge mobilization unit. And some people said back then, oh, great idea, it'll never work. Faculty are too busy, they have to publish, no one's going to be interested. And that has not been our experience. Faculty at different stages of their career and during the semester have more or less time. But we've been inundated with faculty at all stages of their career who want to make a difference and see the benefits of publicly engaged research and publicly engaged teaching and learning. And I think that connection to place just makes it resonate all the more. I don't know, Lisa, in your time here or even from before you came into the university, may have more to add to that.
Yeah, I've been reflecting on a couple of experiences I had when I worked at the community organization, and one in particular was a fantastic opportunity, and it took a lot of effort from the community organization, but also from the university, and it was really to try and get research funding to look at the issue of seniors with complex mental health needs aging in their homes versus going to institutions prematurely. So that was a big issue for that community organization, which provided housing to people. Also a very big issue for the province because we have the oldest population in the country. And so many, people were interested in this, and we managed to get researchers, government officials, community people around the table. And I would say that it was, when I look at that spectrum, a slide that was shown, the 2, 4, in, and with. We were at the with part of that spectrum in that particular research project because we were all learning together. And what the community organization provided was really the practical piece and the people, the actual subjects, I guess you could say. So that was a really powerful part of public engagement, and one that not only the community benefit, but I think also the province and the researchers alone. And I've also had experiences where, people from a university have come in and said, well, we want to do this. And the community people say, no, we don't want you to do this, but they've done it anyway. And so that's definitely not a part of the spectrum. That's definitely on the other end, about the two. And so I really appreciated the conversation around mutual benefits. And understanding too that what organizations are bringing to the table when it comes to public engagement is very varied, but one is not more important than another.
Yes, we often think about how do you, many of these partnerships, they can have, there can be equity, but not necessarily quality. People don't always put in the same amount of inputs for the same amount of outputs, but there's and that's why it's important to have negotiation and conversation about what are the kind of contributions and mutual benefits that each of the partners hope to achieve. Rob, do you have anything else to add about, really getting to, and Lisa too, in your cases, getting to mutual benefits and mutual contributions? What does that really look like in practice? I think, Lisa, you gave us one example. Might there be others?
I think for me, a lot of the success we've had is good project management. You get into the actual mechanics of how you make the connections happen, good communications, simple things, when you're starting a project, do a project charter. be very clear with partners on what the objectives are, what the timeline is. And it isn't always going to be mutual equal benefit. And that's fine as long as people are clear on what the expectations are and what the deliverables are. And I often, when I do presentations on this stuff, you know, I don't pretend I'm a scholar of public engagement. I'm very much a practitioner. And it very much is in the way you organize the work, the way you communicate it, and just being upfront and authentic and earnest. But also, we always emphasize we have fun. You know, it's a lot of fun getting out of the day-to-day in the office work. COVID has limited some of that, but I think the interrelationships, the social capital, really make it a really rewarding activity.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's the basics of how to have a successful relationship, really, isn't it? It's you know, it's all about communication, understanding expectations, and having that mutual respect for each other's roles and what everybody brings to the table.
I think what I'm going to do is you can add in more from your Canadian application as we look at this framework and its applications and in respect to the kind of questions that might have come from the chats. So Rebecca, might you tell us about some of the questions that have been raised or contributed in the chat? Might you have a leading question for our panel?
Hi, Laura Lee. We have a quietly and attentively listening audience today. So I would once again suggest that if folks have questions, if they'd like to raise examples from their institutions, it's all fair game, and please go ahead and do that. In terms of the next step, in terms of our questioning, I think it'd be interesting. So we've heard quite a bit. Oh, actually, I see that a question has just come in, so let's get to that. Alex raises a point. I struggle with the idea of mutual benefits, which seems problematically transactional. So could the panelists speak to that a little bit?
So who would like to go first in that?
I'm happy to jump in, but I know, Laura Lee, you may have thoughts on this, and David as well, of course, Lisa. Problematically transactional is a good comment, and I'd love to have more dialogue on that, because for me, when we go out as a university and proactively have, like I'm collaborating with the OECD now on a project on innovation and on how the regional innovation system, particularly related to oceans, has evolved in Newfoundland and Labrador, particularly the St. John's region. And I'll reach out to the Ocean Cluster Organization and to the City of St. John's and other levels of government and industry organizations. And that's more of an industry-oriented project. We have others that focus on social, environmental, etc. And so we have research we want to do in conjunction with the OECD. But those colleagues in those various organizations are all busy doing their day jobs, running full out if you're in a particular firm, trying to keep the firm alive and succeed. If you're in government, you're under a lot of pressure these days, and seldom do you get time to reflect on how successful the policies and programs are. So in my mind, when I create an opportunity like this in collaboration with my OECD partners, I am offering something to the community partners, the government partners, the industry partners, but I also need them to come to the table and be willing to be interviewed by some of the researchers or to offer documents that they may have that are available on the topic. And so as long as you communicate up front, and in fact, just today, before this session, I read a first draft of a project charter and did a bunch of edits, and we're going to have various advisory committees, etc. So for me, that's the nuts and bolts of doing this kind of work. Many of the projects I'm involved in, though, originate in the community, where we get emails or have sessions and someone is saying, do you have anybody at Memorial who can help us with research on blue mussels? And we do the reach out to our colleagues and try to broker that follow-up. Hopefully that informs that question, but I'd be open to others having thoughts on that.
Hey folks, this is Rebecca. I'm just going to jump in. There was a follow-up comment, and Lisa, this may be an area where you would be able to comment. Alex goes on and says, just notes, there was the idea of the problematically transactional potential nature of the mutual benefits, but then clarifying also the fact that our institutions do hold social responsibilities. Is that something that either of you would care to comment on?
I feel like this would be a good conversation, probably. So I'm not sure I'm getting entirely the point, but I do take your point in terms of the problematically transactional comment. And I have felt that way in the past, that, there's some sort of engagement and then everybody goes away and you're kind of left hanging. That does occasionally happen, and that can be problematic. But I think that I haven't felt that way in many years, and that maybe it's because of relationship building or the expectations are clear. But my sense whenever I've dealt with people at Memorial, when I was working in the community, was that we're very much working at an issue together, and I might take something different from it than what someone from the university did at the time, but that we both left better knowing the issue and maybe how to solve it as well.
If I could, offer so related, I think it's a really great, this transactional question, a really interesting one. And, in some ways assumes really like, this is 100% like material in nature in terms of why we are together. And so I offer maybe another way to think about this through the notion of the concept of contract versus covenant. And this is a little work that I actually explored in the humanities around thinking about engagement, not as contract, which is transactional in nature. And from that point of view, a lot of the contractual view is it's about acquisition. It's about kind of keeping out for yourself. If you think about building a legal contract, you're kind of building that with your own idea in mind. And then the other part of the contract is when the terms aren't met, you can walk away. Whereas sort of a covenantal view is more of the notion that even in the worst of times, those are the times where you actually stick together even more. And it's more about it's a relational view. It comes out of broader theological thought, like Rabbi Sachs writes about this in England. It's kind of a cool kind of thing, but it's a way to think about like commitment in society and thinking about people's own dispositions for sacrifice, and thinking about how do you build basically a virtuous kind of organization or institution that allows for a way of thinking or practices that are create this kind of mindset, which is, it's hard to come by. Let's be honest with that in this world around how we think about it. There's actually some interesting work out of the University of Michigan at their Ross School, where they look at this notion of organizational virtuousness, and this kind of notion of covenant relates there, where it looks at not only the transaction, but what's actually the quality of maybe this more teleological end of where we hope to go together for a flourishing society. So that's my humanities add-on for today. But just those are some additional thoughts.
Let me also add on, David, you talked about, instead of transactional, I view these partnerships and so forth not as static, and the transactional parts are important, especially when you examine some partnerships and understand why they're not succeeding, but they are relational. I think much of our research shows that it's people can come and go, but it's the relationship that really is very important, and also developmental. So I would add that in trying to get to mutual benefits and outcomes, that we think of it as developmental as well as relational. And we could talk about more about that, but I think those two elements are critical to sustainability of these enterprises, such that you can achieve finally mutual benefits.
I also think that they can be transformational, and I think about the public engagement that I had when I was with a community organization related to long-term care and seniors with mental health issues staying in their homes longer. And from that community organization's perspective, it changed some of the services that we were offering. And it made us go down a different road in terms of our the strategic plan that the organization had at the time. So they could be transactional, but they certainly can be transformative.
Rebecca,
we've got a couple more comments and questions. There are two, and I'm going to just sort of start briefly with the first one. This is from Ben, and he's just asking the phrase public engagement. He's wondering if that is a widely accepted and understood term with our stakeholders. But I'm also going to jump to the next question because I think that Rob, you can probably sort of speak to that relatively quickly. And then the next question is following up on some of the comments made by Lisa and by Rob on the idea of width on the continuum. And that's just asking about the idea of co-creation with partners. Ryan would like to hear more about that. And specifically, as always, lessons learned are always appreciated.
I can kick off on both of those quickly.
Yes.
And on public engagement, when we started our process, when our last president arrived, we had a research framework that had been developed, a strategy for the university. We had a teaching and learning framework. And already in our mission statement was public engagement as part of the mission of the university. But it had never been developed or fleshed out as a concept or through a consultation process, ironically. We had lots of units doing it for many, many years. And so I deliberately did not define public engagement up front in the process. We talked about how it was collaborative. We looked at the Carnegie model in the US and how that classification works. We looked at the Beacons for Public Engagement model in the UK, and their EDGE tool was really helpful, which I think was largely based on the work of Barbara Holland, who is a great collaborator with the Engagement Academy. And we drew on the Engage Australia folks. And so, you know, the terminology, many people prefer community engagement. There was regional engagement was the common term in Australia at the time. We like the public engagement term after our consultation process, which is similar to what they use mostly in the UK, largely because, and my background is really rural development, community development. And I know that community development in government and often in the university is seen as a really positive, community-based, collaborative activity. But for people, some people in the business school or in engineering or in the sciences, it's seen as, yeah, that's small scale, really nice stuff. You go do that and we'll deal with the real economy or we'll deal with the real organizations. And we didn't want to marginalize public engagement at Memorial. We wanted all faculties, all people to know, and all external collaborators and partners to know this can relate to you. If you're an individual citizen, if you're a rural community, if you're an urban community, if you're a business, if you're a social enterprise. So that on public engagement is why we went with that term. It can be confusing because it is a common term now with governments, the International Association for Public Participation. So I think it's really important for an institution to go through a process to define and collaborate what works for them. On co-creation, I would just say there are many faculty members who historically have gone out, done research, published stuff, and the community never heard from them again. And of course, that's not a healthy way of operating. So many believe unless you're co-creating, it's not legitimate. And I actually believe there's room for all of the above. Again, you need to be upfront and clear with collaborators what the goal is and who's going to contribute what. One thing I have found, it's very valuable for communities of all types to benefit from the independence and integrity of faculty members. Academic freedom means something. And often it's good for a community to have a partner who they work with to make sure they ground truth the work, but who has independence to write what they think in the end. But you need to be upfront in understanding all that. My colleagues may have other views, or bring it on.
I'm going to call time. This is such a zesty discussion. but we do want to respect people's time, and there's been a good conversation also in the chat. So I know that there's so much more to be had, more questions to be shared, discussed, answered. So let's think of this as the beginning of further conversations with those of you who are seeking to make public engagement a priority at your institutions. Therefore, we do want to offer that next step. So we hope that you consider this webinar session as a preview of the in-person event happening in July. As I mentioned at the top of this webinar, the Engagement Academy is specifically for university leaders. And we are calling this event, ta-da, yes, we're calling this event the Commitment to Place, so a continuing conversation, leading engaged institutions to support thriving communities and regions. It's going to be taking place July 13 through 15, 2022. It's a 2.5-day in-person professional development and planning experience, and it's going to be held at Memorial's Signal Hill campus. This is Memorial's newest campus, indeed up on the hill overlooking St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. It's a dynamic collaborating hub for public innovation exchange. And the location itself is inspiring as it overlooks the ocean, the harbor, and the colorful city of St. John's. And I understand in July that we may be able to see some maybe breaching humpbacks or playful minke. So in addition to being immersed in working in this lovely conference center with unmatched vistas, we promise that there will be situated learning and enrichment off campus in the community as well. As I mentioned, this event will be the first Canadian offering of the Engagement Academy's public engagement training for university leadership. And it's going to be presented collaboratively with Memorial University's Office of Public Engagement. So together we have really been working to customize a design for you of mid to senior level university leaders, be you administrators, presidents, vice presidents, deans, directors, or senior faculty leaders, or staff leaders, and even community partners, in a very interactive, action-oriented, as I used the word, immersion program on critical issues that are related to community university engagement in Canada, with particular focus on how a commitment to place can be pivotal to you positioning and strengthening engagement as a highly integrated university activity to help your universities and regions thrive in this rapidly changing world. We're bringing together a top-tier set of international instructional resources, experienced leaders of the Engagement Academy like David and myself, Canadian resources like Lisa, Rob, and others, with executive perspectives provided by Memorial University's president, Diane Simmons, as well as three-time president Judith Vermaele, and others will be on the docket as well. Key topics will include public engagement-oriented organizational change, building focus, advancing your public engagement action plan, creating successful public engagement partnerships, monitoring and evaluating public engagement, which is important, and more on public engagement as a competitive strategy. What past participants have felt so powerful about attending the Engagement Academy is this dedicated, almost delicious time and space to more intensely focus on this evolving element, community engagement, public engagement in your institution. And the second powerful piece is receiving facilitated, mentored feedback from instructional resources and peers to this action plan that's created around a particular issue that participants come to address that's critical to their institution, resulting in this concrete plan that can be taken back and activated. By attending, you would be definitely getting individual leadership skills, but for maximum value, we highly encourage you to send a team, 2 or 3 university and community leaders, to collaboratively hear the content and work together on this specific issue-focused action plan. So we welcome you to look at the full details on this July session on the Office of Public Engagement's website. The full details for the session, as well as the registration page, are both now in the chat. And don't miss the early bird pricing special that's available until April 30th. Virologists are predicting safer conditions, hopefully by midsummer. But of course, we are well aware that travel is still somewhat uncertain this year, and our cancellation policies reflect that reality. The conference will be COVID-19 safe and compliant with all Canadian government health regulations to ensure that we protect the health and safety of all of the attendees. So our time and conditions only heighten the importance of the urgency of partnerships as we take on these critical issues. So with that, it's our time. I want to thank our helpful, insightful panelists, Lisa, David, and Rob, and the excellent, competent Memorial University programming and technical staff that you haven't seen but are working behind off air, Rebecca, Penny, Axeli, Rudy, and John. And for you, for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your interest, your contributions, and your questions. The recording of this event will be posted on the Memorial University Office of Public Engagement YouTube channel and will be shared with all of you as participants as a follow-up email within the next week. On behalf of my colleagues, we appreciate the opportunity to connect and share with you and look forward to seeing you in person in July at St. John's. Or, I am told, as it is said locally, long may your big jib draw. I have to practice that. Long may your big jib draw, meaning may you have good fortune for a long time. Or, as I would say, be well and be engaged. Be well and be engaged. Till the next time, thank you.